Hi, I'm Kathryn Lopez from the National Review Institute, and I'm so honored to welcome Ryan Anderson and Alexandra DeSanctis, authors of Tearing Us Apart, How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing. There's a new paperback edition of this. Both are from the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and there's a new foreword reflecting the Dobbs decision, the end of Roe versus Wade, because the book came out exactly about at the point where Roe was about to be overturned, which was brilliant timing on their part, and a little bit of a gamble, but the leak of the Dobbs decision helped a lot. Ryan, so much has happened. You and Zan mentioned this in the new forward. So much has happened in the last year, and it's almost impossible to keep track of the law and every state. And what do you think are the most important things to bear in mind about where we are right now when it comes to abortion in America?
Sure. I mean, as a starting point, I would just say we're much better off than where we were a year ago, but we're not at the goal line yet, right? So we're better than where we were, but we haven't arrived at the final destination. And I'll give a couple of concrete. I mean, that's a very platitudinous way of answering it, but it was just last week that there was a study reported that showed that the states that had enacted pro-life laws had 90,000 fewer abortions. The so-called abortion sanctuary states had 60,000 more abortions, which meant a net decrease of 30,000 abortions, which means right now, and it's more complicated. You have to factor in birth rates, and then how do you factor that with, or conception rates with abortion rates? But there's potentially 30,000 additional human beings on this planet right now because of these laws that went into effect to protect unborn babies, right? And so that we should give thanks for that. The overturning of Roe allowed a whole host of states to have pro-life laws that sprang into effect. These were like the spring laws that sprung into effect the moment Roe was gone. Some of them took 30 days for the state attorney general to certify that Roe had been overturned, and then they sprung into effect. Other states have enacted laws more and more protective of the unborn. So we've seen, for example, the state of Florida, that last year they passed a 15-week bill, a heartbeat bill, or sorry, a 15-week, a pain-capable bill. And then just earlier this year, they passed a 6-week heartbeat bill. That has not yet gone into effect, but the House, the Congress, both House and Senate in Florida passed it, and the governor signed it into law. So we're seeing more and more protective state laws go into effect. That's the good. Bad, we're also seeing some of the blue states enact more and more, to my mind, regressive laws when it comes to abortion, right? Becoming sanctuary states for abortion, paying for abortion, allowing abortion throughout all 9 months of pregnancy, including the moment of pregnancy, et cetera, et cetera. We're seeing public opinion turn in a harsher, more pro-abortion direction. And this was just last week or the week before the New York Times ran a story on this. Because what we've noticed, and Zan has written brilliantly on this, is that the media and all the pro-choice activists, but I repeat myself, they lie about what these pro-life laws do. And they make it seem like pro-life laws threaten the lives of mothers, that pro-life laws are anti-science, anti-medicine, they'll harm women. What Zan pointed out in a piece that she did, a long investigative piece, she went through every existing pro-life law in the books and showed that each and every one of them had protections for life-saving medical care for the mother. But when the media lies about this, it shapes public opinion. And that's also why we've seen the dichotomy between state-level legislative initiatives to protect unborn babies and then state-level ballot initiatives. We've lost most of the ballot initiatives, and we should just be upfront about that. We've had setbacks, and we should expect to have setbacks on the road to ultimate victory. But that's because in the media, the messaging wars, they control the media and we don't, right? They control the New York Times and the Washington Post. We control National Review. And unfortunately, NR doesn't have the readership or the circulation of the New York Times and the Washington Post. We've also discovered that politicians who don't speak on this issue, they do poorly. They allow the other side to frame the debate. Politicians who speak out on this issue clearly and boldly, they do well. And we saw that in the midterms elections. A variety of governors who signed into law, more and more protective laws for unborn babies, they got reelected, sometimes by very wide margins. All right, so let me just stop there because I could keep going for a while, but you have other questions. Zan has things to say. But overall status is that we're better than we were. We've had some setbacks. We're not where we need to be. There's more work to be done.
Zan, this point that Ryan brings up is so critical. I've been struck by the number of young women who have come up to me in the last year, and you may have had the same experience, who say, I'm genuinely confused. People believe that pro-lifers think that if you are a pregnant woman and have cancer, pro-lifers want you to die. Pro-lifers don't want doctors to treat your cancer. The doctor can treat your cancer, and that's part of some of the work that you've done, Zan. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I do wonder, some of it's lying. Some of it I think is genuine confusion. Some of it I wonder is lawyers who are telling doctors they can't be doctors. What is your reporting found, Zan?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple angles to this. The first thing to bear in mind is just to reiterate what Ryan said, that every pro-life law currently on the books, and as far as I'm aware, every pro-life law being debated or considered, has very clear language saying that if a woman has some kind of healthcare complication, pregnancy complication, or other healthcare need, she can receive healthcare, even if it will have the inadvertent effect of harming her unborn child. Right. And the thing to keep in mind here, which is what the other side either pretends not to know or people don't actually know, is that that's not an abortion. Right. If a procedure intended to help a pregnant mother, inadvertently harms or even kills her unborn child, that's not the same thing as an abortion procedure. An abortion procedure, the primary intent, the intention of the procedure is to kill the unborn child, right? To end the pregnancy by killing the unborn child by some means. And so I think the root of the either confusion or the malice, depending on who you're talking about, it comes from the fact that for 50 years now, we've been calling abortion healthcare, right? We're supposed to think that abortion is a healthcare procedure, and people think, oh, healthcare, so something must be wrong, right? It's some kind of cure, some kind of treatment. And so we conceptualize pregnancy as a disease. Abortion is the treatment, right? Killing the child is this healthcare procedure to treat this disease of an unwanted pregnancy. And so in this framework, it makes sense that a lot of people, when they're lied to, would believe, oh yeah, of course, abortion is healthcare. If women can't get healthcare, that's a dangerous situation for them. So I think there's this big bundle of lies. And in that context, it's very easy for malicious people to come in and say, women are going to be dying as a result of pro-life laws, when in fact, the text of every single one of these laws explicitly says, if a woman needs healthcare or there's some kind of pregnancy complication that puts her life at risk, a doctor may always care for the woman, right? The doctor may not directly kill the unborn child, but there's actually never a medical situation where for her own health, a mother needs a doctor to directly kill her child, right? She might need to give birth early, and that might result in a child dying if it's, too young to survive outside the womb, or, being in a kind of premature situation and being kept on, a ventilator, all these kinds of things they can do to try and keep a child alive. That's not directly killing the child. There's no medical situation that requires directly and intentionally killing the unborn child. And I think it's striking that the very people who lie about this are creating the climate in which people begin to sincerely fear whether they're going to get the healthcare they need, right? If women go to the doctor or are too afraid to go to the doctor to get healthcare that they need because they think they're going to be told that's an abortion, you can't have that, and those women suffer, it's because of the abortion proponents who've been saying women can't get healthcare now because of pro-life laws. And so the very people who are claiming to care about this have actually created the problem by, spreading these lies.
And what is so striking to me is this has been our point forever. There are two patients, right? And so you can care for both of these patients. And it strikes me, it's at the heart of the lie that we don't care about women, right? What Alexandra has been most striking to you in the last year as somebody who writes about this almost primarily, almost exclusively?
Yeah, I mean, I would say not to keep talking about the same healthcare issue, but I guess I'm not totally surprised, but it has been striking to me to see how much of the oxygen in the abortion conversation has been taken up by just trying to refute this lie over and over and over again that women are going to die, particularly in, I would say, the first 3 to 6 months after Dobbs. This was the number one thing that abortion proponents wanted to talk about. And I think that's really interesting on multiple levels. The first of which is kind of what I just talked about in response to your last question, Kathryn. But Also because it tells me that the other side doesn't want to talk about abortion, right? You don't really see Democrats or abortion supporters saying, Dobbs was wrong because abortion is this great thing and we need to have abortion through all 9 months because blah, blah, blah. No, the number one thing they want to talk about is claiming that women are dying in droves because of pro-life laws. That's what they want to talk about. And so while that's frustrating because we're having to come up with, as pro-lifers, good ways to talk about this and explain what is kind of a complicated issue, it suggests to me that their arguments for abortion are very poor, and they know that their position is not popular, right? They know the policies they want are very unpopular, even with Democratic voters, and they just don't want to talk about it. And so kind of on a similar track, seeing the bad response from Republicans in that kind of climate where we really can push our advantage and win the people over, it's been kind of disappointing to see that. I'm sure we'll have time to talk about that more, but I don't think we've taken enough advantage of that clear weakness.
Ryan, one of the things that has been striking over the last year is how much Democratic politicians talk about children in the midst of this. The Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, her first response to the Dobbs leak was to tweet about her infant granddaughter's right to choose. Kamala Harris the other day was talking with Joy Reid on MSNBC about her goddaughter and her right to choose and how she and her friends don't want to go to colleges in states where you can't have abortions. Why on earth are adults wanting children to have abortions? I mean, Ryan, what is this culture? Is this the culture of 50 years of Roe?
Yes, and 50 years of the sexual revolution. And one of the points that Alexandra and I make towards the end of the book, well, actually, I guess we make it twice, once in the chapter on how abortion harms women, and then once in the chapter on how it has harmed the culture, and then in the conclusion of like what we need to do now. Abortion is the fail-safe for the sexual revolution. Right? It's both the catalyst, it's what has allowed it to take place, first the pill, and then abortion as kind of the ultimate backup for the pill. But then it's been an accelerant. It's been, Mary Eberstadt has referred to it back, when the Weekly Standard existed. She would say, it was like the sacrament of the sexual revolution. And I think this is why you see some of the really like grotesque shout your abortions. I love if men were. I think the phrase is if men could get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament. Like, I mean, they've used language like this, and so what this suggests to me is that we can have the best pro-life laws in the world. Until we actually have a holistic response to the sexual revolution, we're not actually going to have a culture of life. John Paul II, he had both like his Evangelium Vitae, where he speaks about the culture of life, culture of death. He also has a theology of the body. To my mind, these two things are intimately related. And it's precisely by getting the nature of the human person wrong, getting the nature of human embodiment wrong, that we then get both all of the sexual chaos that we've seen for 50 some years and all of the abortion chaos that we've seen. And this is why also I think, so two parts to your question. This is why, one, some people think that for their granddaughters to be equal, for their granddaughters to be free, for their granddaughters to be liberated, they actually need to be liberated from their own bodies, from their own biology, from their own embodiment as female. They need to use pharmaceuticals or surgical techniques to allow them to compete in the sexual marketplace and the economic marketplace as if they were men, right? And this is where Erica Bacchiacchi, our colleague at the Ethics and Policy Center, has done such kind of just pioneering, path-breaking legal scholarship to point that the framework of legal equality that they're using is based on an anthropology that's based on a lie, that the female body is somehow a defective form of the male body. And so in order to make females equal to males, we need to make their bodies more like the male body. And what Erica points out is that instead, a vision of someone like Mary Wollstonecraft was that men should actually practice the same virtues that we expect of women, and particularly with chastity, with sexual restraint, with fidelity inside of marriage, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that I think should be a high priority issue for the pro-life movement, it's something that we are doing a lot of work thinking through the future of EPPC, is what does a holistic, systematic response to the sexual revolution look like? Because this has threads in family policy, in abortion policy, in transgender policy, in religious liberty policy. I mean, there's so many interconnected aspects here. And to my mind, we don't yet have a thorough, systematic response to this. So that's where my thoughts go there. The only other thing I would add is the way that you opened that question was to say that when the leak happened, the governor of New York said this about her granddaughter. I mean, I think that's something else to point out. We're now over a year after the Dobbs decision, well over a year over the leak. This is unprecedented in modern Supreme Court history. We've had leaks about what the vote count might be, what the outcome of a case. We've never had a leak opinion. We've now had more or less all of the conservative justices harassed at their homes. We've had an assassination attempt when it comes to Justice Kavanaugh. And then we've had all of these bogus news stories trying to my mind, discredit the court, right? As Alexandra pointed out, they don't want to actually talk about abortion. So the two things they're doing, talking about female health and then talking about how this is an illegitimate court, they're trying to my mind, get either Alito or Thomas to retire early so that Joe Biden gets to appoint their successor. They're trying to raise the costs so that a future Amy Coney Barrett says, I'll just stay a law professor rather than being a judge and then a justice. So I think what's going on here is an attempt to discourage potential future nominees from serving on the court. It's an attempt to discredit the court in the eyes of the general public. It's an attempt to get Justice Thomas and Justice Alito to retire early. And it's an attempt, I think, ultimately to continue poisoning our politics. I mean, this is one of the chapters of the book is, the Roe v. Wade decision. Abortion has harmed everything it's touched, including our political process. And this is just, one more example of what's going on. And it truly is, I think it's appalling, but it's also unprecedented in modern history vis-a-vis the court.
I think I may have said this in a conversation with you, Ryan, before, but there was one morning where I was outside an abortion clinic and one of the New York City for abortion rights activists recognized me and she said, Kathryn Jean Lopez, what are you going to blame on abortion today? And I thought, oh goodness, she actually reads me, because the fact of the matter is, as your subtitle says, abortion harms everything and solves nothing. So much of the anger in our politics, it has to do with abortion. So much of the misery in people's lives, it has to do with abortion. It goes back to the point you make about having a holistic idea of what the human person is. If we don't, then of course we're confused and unhappy. And I don't have Erica's book handy, but I have Mary Eberstadt's latest, Adam and Eve After the Pill Revisited.
Yes.
And I think it's really important, because I think when people talk about the pill, they think this like a Catholic thing. But it needs to be much more than a Catholic thing. It's a green thing, I always think that's a great entryway, and Mary talks about that a lot. And Alexandra, can you talk? I know you've had conversations with Erica, more often than not, I know you get this response, Ryan gets this response, I've been getting this response for 25 years. Oh, well, you're against abortion, so you have to make contraception more available. But one of the points Erica makes is that once you do that, once, as Ryan said, this is your backup, people engage in more risky behavior. So the likelihood of having more abortions is higher.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And if you look at the statistics, and folks who want to fact check me on this can go read Dr. Michael New, because his work covers this in great detail. But if you look at the statistics on this, an increase in access to contraception actually does increase the abortion rate. Now, it's not a direct causal relationship, but it's not as though contraception access goes up and abortion rates go down. It's quite the opposite way. And I think it's the logical reason for that is pretty clear, right? If you have contraception, you have a more risky mindset or a willingness to engage in more risky behaviors, certainly a willingness to engage in sex when you don't want to be pregnant with someone who you don't want to raise a child with. And the increase in those types of pregnancies, because contraception does not work perfectly, leads to an increase in abortion. It's just a logical connection. And factually speaking, that is how it goes a lot of the time. And it's interesting you raised kind of the green case against contraception. I actually just finished an article for the Human Life Review that'll be in the fall issue, so you can keep an eye out for that. Kind of digging into this, a long piece looking at how many young women are abandoning the pill in particular because of its side effects, and not just physical side effects, but psychological kind of mood side effects. And none of this is studied really. Studies don't take a look at this, because for 50 years now, or 60 years, whatever it's been, everyone's just said, okay, the pill is this great solution. It's a societal aid. It'll help, people, free love and all that. It'll kind of liberate women in particular. And we can also kind of use it as this band-aid for female hormonal health problems, right? We'll just give it to women and it'll work great and regularize everything. That's not how it works. We're finding out that's really not how it works. And so I kind of dig into in the piece, at the same time that you're having this rise of women who really are discontented with hormonal contraception for physical reasons and relationship reasons a lot of the time, you're also seeing a rise of people on the left questioning the sexual revolution. So writers like Louise Perry or Christine Embo or Mary Harrington, they certainly, none of them would call themselves a conservative or a social conservative, but they all are really discontented with various aspects of the sexual revolution world. And so I think this is really a moment for those of us with this kind of holistic vision to say, look, there's something better here, right? There's a reality to being human that we'd love to invite you to take a look at, right? So I really see those two threads there kind of as an opportunity and an invitation for us.
And we can't underscore that enough, that it is a grave scandal of women's healthcare in America that teenage girls, not even teenage girls, 12-year-old girls, because their period isn't normal, are put on the contraception pill because the doctor figures, well, they're going to have sex anyway. What a way to treat a patient, right? Something that's possibly causes cancer. We don't know because there are not enough studies, right? But there's some pretty bad indicators. It really is cruel to women to not look into this more and not be more honest about it. I remember early on in my career at NR writing about like embryo donation and how doctors don't tell the truth about that, give loads of money to young people who are desperate for money. But there's something just so commonplace about the pill and how much it's prescribed, and it's a real detriment to women. And so thank you for writing that article, Zan. We look forward to seeing it. Ryan, when you think about politicians, and I kind of live in a little bit of fear of the presidential election to come and what people might say, and I personally don't think, the fact that the end of Roe is so closely associated with the Republican Party and with Trump is a good cultural thing, but so it is. I remember Archbishop Chaput from Philadelphia, retired Archbishop from Philadelphia, saying years ago that if you had asked him decades ago which party would be the party of abortion on demand, he would have never predicted it would be the Democratic Party because there are so many Catholics in the Democratic Party, and surely they would lead. Well, no, we know what happened there. So grateful for the Republicans to stepping up to the plate, but that's not exactly a pure witness. What's some of your cautions and maybe advice to Republicans moving forward?
Sure. Just to echo the premise of the question, I was very fortunate to work for Father Richard John Newhouse for what ended up being the last 2 years of his life. And he always said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party, the Democrats left me. Right. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. in the cause of civil rights for African Americans. And he thought the next great human rights issue for his generation was human rights for the unborn. And people who once were pro-life. We forget that Ted Kennedy, Bill Clinton,
Jesse Jackson,
they all at one point were pro-life, and then they all evolved, right? Because the party orthodoxy split in a way that wasn't predictable. Because the Democrats were the party of the little guy, and who's littler than the one in the womb. And so there were a whole host of people like Newhouse who were Democrats and then gravitated towards the Republican Party because the Democrats left them. Right. And they thought this was the moral issue of their generation. And so advice to give is, again, to be holistic. And I think we've had some good examples here. So look at what both Florida and Texas have done. When Governor DeSantis signed in, I think it was originally, it was the 15-week pain capable bill. They created a fatherhood initiative in Florida that he signed in to encourage, because one of the stats that we know is that the father of the unborn child is the person who has the greatest impact on the mother's decision to keep the child or to abort the child, right? So a whole host of survey research shows that when a woman is contemplating an abortion, her sexual partner, the father of the child, is one of the leading influences on whether she'll keep the child or abort the child. And so they created a fatherhood initiative. Then this past time around, when he signed into law the 6-week bill, the heartbeat bill, he also signed into law a fiscal package that allocated $25 million to the Florida Pregnancy Care Network, right? And so think about all of the pregnancy care centers that are currently being vandalized, firebombed, harassed by Jane's Revenge. What Governor DeSantis did, what the Florida State House did, was allocate additional resources in their direction to help the women who would now be making a choice for life. I think there's something particularly grotesque about Jane's Revenge and how they're targeting pregnancy centers, because these pregnancy centers don't do anything to coerce anyone. They don't get in anyone's way. They don't prevent someone from having an abortion. All they do is they say, for someone who voluntarily comes to us, someone who wants to make a choice for life, we're going to empower you to do so. We're going to equip you. We're going to provide you with the support and the care and the networks of connectivity that you need to make the choice that you want. Don't forget that, some women, quote, shout their abortions. Many women experience abortion as a defeat. They experience it not as liberating, but as defeating. Another example of this is in Texas. As the Texas legislature had signed in, the bill that was known as like the bounty hunter bill. No, they found a way of getting around Roe to start protecting unborn babies even before Roe was finally overturned. They allocated $100 million to the Texas Alternatives to Abortion program. So this would be advice to pro-lifers, that we can walk and chew gums at the same time. There's a supply side and a demand side to abortion. And this is crass. I don't like always speaking in economic supply and demand, but it's a helpful heuristic for thinking about this. There are reasons why women think they need an abortion, and we can craft both culture and public policy responses at those reasons, right? No one actually needs an abortion, but women think they need an abortion. And we can look at what those underlying causes are and then address public policy at the demand for abortion side. There's also a supply of abortion, right? Planned Parenthood is the largest supplier of abortion. We can now not only defund Planned Parenthood, but we can simply say it's illegal for you to kill an unborn child, right? And so simultaneously, this would be the advice. Be bold on what the bottom line is. There should be no unjust killing in the United States. That means every child in the womb should have their life protected in law. But then the second part of that famous quote was, protected in law and welcomed in life. And there are things that we can do to help mothers choose life, to bring children into the world. This is where, a lot of the work that Patrick Brown is doing is so vital. How do we think about family policy? How do we think about public policy that would empower women to choose life? That's the advice to GOP politicians.
And for anyone who's not aware, Patrick Brown is at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and paid family leave is a big focus of his work. How can we actually help families flourish? Because we recognize that it's hard to raise a family, it's expensive. And as conservatives, we need to be creative, obviously wanting to be fiscally conservative where possible, but families are the priority. And so can
I add one?
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say one other thing, because I left this out. Use the bully pulpit. I mean, I think that one of the bottom lines advice is, if you don't speak out on this, that doesn't mean the issue is going away. Your opponent will frame you on this issue. And so much of the research that the Susan B. Anthony list has done, now Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, I'll get the new name correct, shows that if you draw the contrast between Lindsey Graham 15-week federal bill, and then more or less the official Democratic platform, which is abortion on demand throughout all 9 months of pregnancy with taxpayer funding, the American people are with us. So we have to draw that contrast. We have to speak boldly. We need our elected officials to do so, and then making incremental progress at the ultimate abolition of abortion.
And Ryan mentioned groups like Jane's Revenge, but we also have politicians like Elizabeth Warren, who and I'm from New York, so Kathy Hochul has a special place in my heart. Again, attacking these places that are simply offering women actual choice. Because anyone who spent any time around abortion clinics or talking to women who are abortion-minded know that frequently these girls and women are being coerced. They feel they have no other option. And so it's a lie to say this is some kind of empowerment or healthcare. They feel forced into the situation. And this is what 50 years of Roe did. Alexandra, earlier Ryan was talking about the media. and what a big role the media plays in this. For people who don't watch this as closely as you do, I always like to have you talk about the example of the CBS reporter who you constantly said, she's like working for Planned Parenthood. She's like a PR person for Planned Parenthood. And then she went to work for Planned Parenthood. Could you talk about that? I mean, we can't exaggerate how bad the media is on this issue.
Yeah, it's almost too good. So this writer, her name is Kate Smith. Her name still is Kate Smith. She was a reporter, supposedly a reporter for CBS News. Called herself, I think she covered abortion access, was how she put it, which is your first giveaway because no straight reporter uses a phrase like abortion access, right? That's an abortion catchphrase. But I followed her work very closely because she was always writing about, this was pre-Dobbs, always writing about abortion access and pro-life laws. And but her work might as well have been produced by somebody out of Planned Parenthood. I mean, it was that slanted. You know, she somehow, lucky for her, landed the first interview with the incoming president of Planned Parenthood a few years back. And, you know, that opens with the interview with, oh, congratulations, and so happy for you. And, you know, one of the questions is, why is it so important to get involved with Planned Parenthood? Or just, you know, a total kid glove interview. All of these interviews were, all of her work was very pro-abortion slanted. And unfortunately, you see this at many publications, right? They all have, perhaps not quite as bad as Kate Smith. Not every reporter leaves and ends up working in PR for Planned Parenthood, but their work looks as though they're getting their talking points from the Planned Parenthood website, or they're getting their information just hearing from Planned Parenthood, whatever they say, believing it, swallowing it, and then going and repeating it. And I don't think it's always, you know, necessarily coming from a pro-abortion point of view. I think Kate Smith was particularly pro-abortion ideologically, but I think a lot of times reporters are very ignorant about this. This is not something they know a lot about. They don't do a lot of research really on anything they write about a lot of the time, unfortunately. And the prevailing ethos here is abortion, pro-abortion content, right? It's hard to find real solid pro-life writing and facts, unfortunately, and reporters don't go digging. And so the upshot here is what most people are consuming is very pro-abortion slanted, whether through, you know, outright intention or through ignorance. And we talk about this a bit in the book, but because so much of the progress we're trying to make as pro-lifers is to convince our fellow Americans that certain policies are the right ones, right? That pro-life laws are the right ones. If people's minds are being shaped by this kind of media, by the Kate Smiths of the world, or by the New York Times editorial boards of the world, we're gonna have a really hard time convincing them, because all of their information is coming from people who are actively either telling them falsehoods or omitting really important information. And so we have to be really aware of that as pro-lifers, and how we try to reach people. We're really fighting against the current. And I'm not a, you know, the media is biased, let's throw up our hands and go home kind of person. I think we certainly have to keep trying, but we have to know that this is the water that people are swimming in, right? People don't have 4 hours a day to go and try to find the truth about what happens in an abortion procedure. They just turn on the TV and watch CNN, or they glance through the newspaper, and what they're seeing is, you know, Kate Smith and others like her, unfortunately.
Some of the most courageous people, I think, in our culture are the women who talk about the pain of abortion. Post-abortion healing is a real thing, but I think it's something that most women don't know about, most people don't know about. Ryan, do we need to do a better job of telling those stories?
Yes. I mean, and not just, I mean, we need to do a better job of telling all stories.
Yeah.
We're especially, you know, someone like me who's, you know, a logic chopping philosopher, you know, needs to remind myself that, you know, we're a narrative species, right? And there's a reason why, you know, Jesus didn't speak in syllogisms. You know, he spoke in parables and he tells stories. As much as I like syllogisms and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I mean, I think there are a variety of stories that we can tell. I mean, I start the list with, you know, women who did not experience their abortions as something they want to shout, something that was liberating, but precisely as a personal defeat. And then the aftermath of that. And then, you know, in some cases, thankfully, the healing that they found. Include the list with people like the Sisters of Life, you know, people who dedicate their lives, you know, putting to bed the lie that, you know, you only care about the child while it's in the womb, and as soon as the baby's born, you stop caring, and you don't even care about the mother at all. I mean, these are people who are giving their entire lives to serving mothers and serving babies, you know, frequently in group homes where they're there to take care of both mother and child. And I think, you know, telling those stories, Kathryn, you yourself have done some good work on this in NR with Mary's, is it Mary's House or Mary's Shelter in Fredericksburg, Virginia? Mary's Shelter, where, you know, that's how I first learned about Mary's Shelter, was through, I think it was the it was the End of Row issue of NR maybe a year and a half ago where you wrote about this, if I remember correctly. And so, I mean, so you can see there are lots of stories that we can tell that can have impact. I also think the stories of people who were thinking about having an abortion and then decided against it, and then raising the child or placing the child for, I mean, both, in some cases, the right choice is then going to be to place the child for adoption. In some cases, the right choice might be raising the child yourself. But in both cases, being able to tell the story of the beauty that that brings, right? I mean, I'm friends with a variety of families who have adopted children, some cases from abortion-minded mothers, and those are beautiful stories. Not without a tinge of tragedy as well, but they still have their own beauty. And then also of people who are thinking of getting an abortion, choosing to bring the child to term. Alexandra and I, at one point in the book, we tell the story of our colleague Eric Niffen, who had a son with special needs. His brain didn't fully develop, and that life was cut short. He only lived a decade. His entire life, he needed, more or less round-the-clock care and attention. But Eric writes this beautiful obituary saying that our son helped us grow in love. He helped his siblings grow in love, and I think all of those stories are just beautiful witnesses to life that we don't do enough to share. Last thing I'll add, we need to tell stories of how great, your run-of-the-mill child is. I think we have a culture that is very anti-child. All of the TV shows that were popular when I was coming of age glamorized this extended adolescence, that your 20s and your 30s, the worst thing that could happen to you would be having a child. That what you want to do in your 20s and your 30s is like make a lot of money, have professional success, and sleep around. Whereas the reality is that, one of the greatest fulfillments in life is actually like getting married, having a family, and children are these great blessings. And we don't tell those stories enough. Kids are not portrayed in movies and TV shows and other kind of cultural products as great gifts. They're portrayed as burdens that'll cramp your style. And so it's understandable why someone who discovers they're pregnant outside of marriage, discovers they're pregnant when they weren't ready to be a mother or a father, would think that they need to have an abortion to solve this problem, rather than viewing this as a blessing in disguise. And so I think those are other stories that we need to tell.
On your point about stories, we do such a disservice to women when we don't tell the amazing stories about what women are capable of. Obviously it's not the ideal situation to be a single mom, but there are heroic single mothers who do amazing things, and the other thing, there's a group called Brave Love out of Dallas that its purpose is to celebrate birth mothers, to change but to both change the culture. So it's not like these mothers abandon their children, because they made it a responsible, beautiful, self-sacrificial choice. But also to let that individual birth mother know they have like parties for birth mothers to say thank you, and they'll have an adult adoptee throw the party. And the point is, like, even if your child never gets to say thank you, like, thank you for the sacrifice you made. And even trying to change the language, so it's not like give up for adoption, but like choose an adoption plan. Obviously, as you point out, there is an unnatural breakage that happens, obviously, when there's an adoption. But it also has incredibly beautiful possibilities, and there's so many stories that speak to that, and we need to tell more of those stories. Alexandra, do you have a favorite chapter in the book?
I think probably the chapter on women is the one I usually end up talking about in interviews, because I think it's the most timely and the most helpful to pro-lifers and kind of learning how to think and speak about the moment that we're in. I don't know, it's not really my favorite necessarily. My favorite to write was probably the one with the media stuff in it, because I've been doing that for so long. I love that stuff. But I think the chapter on women is really, really, and as we've seen, kind of like we talked about at the beginning of our conversation, what the other side wants to talk about is how they think abortion is good for women. And so I'm really proud of the fact that we put together a chapter that helps pro-lifers understand this isn't true, right? Don't be caught flat-footed by someone saying, I don't like abortion, or I understand that the unborn child has rights too, but what about women, right? Have an answer. And so I think we've done a really good job, if I do say so, of giving pro-lifers the material they need to respond to that.
I want to say, if you're watching this live, you can put questions in the chat box, and we'll weave them into the conversation. Ryan, one of the things that you and Zan talk about in the New Forward is how we can't all do everything. And, obviously it can be very distracting and drive me a little crazy when people say, oh, if you're pro-life, you have to focus as much on abortion as on immigration and on every single issue there is. Well, I agree to an extent. Like, human beings are human beings, and we have to treat them with, utmost respect and care about these issues, but no one can pay 100% attention to every issue, right? So that's just impossible. And some of us have to focus on abortion. But one of the things that I've worried a lot about over the last year, is that there is some sense of celebration, and there's reason to celebrate, but I think it's more gratitude, as you said earlier. I'm not about popping champagne corks about the end of Roe. I'm grateful, but so many people have died and have been harmed, and even though lives have been saved, abortion is still a reality in America. How do you think that we can all, as pro-lifers, maybe there are people who are listening who are like, I don't like abortion, but I don't think, the government should be banning it. What's like the examination of conscience we should be doing right now? Because I think it is a fact that most of us could be doing more. And so how should we be thinking about that, Ryan?
Oh, geez, great question. Examination of conscience. I think I would be highly surprised to discover if there's anyone out there who couldn't be doing more. It just strikes me that that has to be true. That very few, if anyone, is actually running on all cylinders to the point that they might actually collapse and break down if they do anything more.
There are women who run maternity homes and go to jail for pro-life witness.
Right.
And I don't know if they can be doing more, but
so there might be, but even in that case, you could say, well, I could pray for 5 more minutes a day, or I could,
right.
donate $1. There's always something more. And so the way that I would think about this is to get practical. This is also like when you go on a retreat and they're like, you got to make concrete resolutions that are attainable. Because if you're too vague, and if you're too highfalutin, so if you set a goal that's just unattainable, you're going to give up on it. It's like New Year's resolutions. I'm going to exercise more. And then actually say, I'm going to go Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m. to a gym. You can actually attain that. So I would think of, concrete things that might be attainable. I'm going to volunteer 1 day a month at a pregnancy resource center, or I'm going to start, today, go online and establish a credit card donation, a monthly donation to a pregnancy resource center. Or I'm going to write a letter to the editor once a month to a different publication responding to a biased news story that I see covering abortion. These are, and depending on what your vocation is, you might be someone with financial resources that you could make that credit card donation right now. You might be someone who's, a good writer, a good thinker, and you need an outlet for it. Right? You can easily find once a month a biased news story that you could write a letter to the editor responding to. You might have organizational skills. You could go, I remember one year when I was working at Heritage, we had a day of service where we went to Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center, and they just needed us to organize all of the baby clothes, right? You had 2T, 3T, 4T, all the different diaper sizes. They just needed people to clean up everything that had been donated and put some order. And, there were some of us that were good at that. Some of us weren't so good at that, but everyone can do something. We could keep going. Some people, obviously, for Alexandra and myself, part of our vocation is thinking about law and public policy, right? Thinking about what would the next incremental step look like at the federal level, at the state level. Scholars like Robbie George and John Finnis, how do we tell the truth about the 14th Amendment so that we can not just leave this at a state level, but also properly have a federal role in this. So there's work to be done everywhere, and my advice would be to get concrete, be specific, and don't shoot for the stars, right? Something that's attainable and something that's specific.
Well, and I would add, first step, I've been struck by how many pro-life groups I speak to, and I say, Columbia would be an example. I spoke to the Columbia pro-life group a month or so ago, and I said, where is the closest pregnancy care center? And they didn't know. And I think that's a common experience. I live in fear that if a woman ever thought to even knock on the door of a church, would anyone know what to tell her, if she was pregnant and looking for help? Know what the resources are. I also think a very super basic thing is, if you're a pro-lifer and people know you're a pro-lifer, make sure that the young people in your life know that they can come to you, because pro-lifers, I sometimes think, are the last people young people would come to, because they worry that we would judge them. And so, I mean, that's super simple. But also, Ryan, you talk about people with means. If you really have means, think big. I mean, as I said before, there are people who started maternity homes who didn't plan on it, but they just realized, like, that's what's needed. Housing is needed. And so think big. I mean, some people can aim for the stars. So if you're in that position, think about it. And the other thing I would say, over the weekend, I talk to my Uber drivers all the time, and I don't drive, so I take a lot of Ubers. And this grandmother was telling me about her daughter, who she and her husband adopted 4 children. 3 are a sibling set, which generally means that you intended on adopting one child, but the birth mother had other children, and you want to keep them together, which is a marvelous thing to keep siblings together. And then the other child, she was taken into the foster care system at birth because the mother was addicted to meth. And I mean, this is a reality in America. There should not be children in foster care if we're actually pro-life. And so to be thinking more about that, it's not just about abortion. And as you intimated earlier, I mean, there are more couples who want to adopt baby children than are babies who are alive because of abortion. And so to let women really know, and girls know, that there are loving couples who want to love on their children and raise their children. And too often, pregnant women who are abortion-minded equate adoption with foster care. And you could understand why a scared woman would say it's better to kill my baby than put my baby in the foster care system for 18 years. And we have to combat that myth. Alexandra, can I ask you the same question? What more can we be doing? And has maybe your answer to that question changed over the last year?
Yeah, well, I'll take it a slightly different direction, since I think you both covered a lot of the really big practical kind of putting your feet in motion type things we need to be doing. I agree with all of that. That's kind of similar to what I usually tell audiences when I'm talking about this. But I think a really big thing that I always like to throw in there is you actually have a responsibility to learn how to speak about this issue, and not just to say the same things we've been saying for 50 to 60 years, right? And that was kind of the idea of our book, is like, look, we've been telling people that abortion kills an unborn human being for 50 plus years, and a lot of people don't care, right? And that doesn't mean we stop saying it. That's the fundamental harm of abortion. We have to, how to, be able to refute the claim that it's just a clump of cells, or it's part of a woman's body, or whatever other argument there is. But we actually need to go beyond that now, because that argument doesn't work. And a lot of people will say, oh yeah, sure, I don't care, women need it anyway, or whatever, insert the reason here. And so I think as pro-lifers, we all have I think a lot more places to talk about this issue than we choose to do so. And honestly, a lot more places to talk about this issue than we might even have to volunteer or to donate, or not that we shouldn't be doing those things, but the opportunity to speak about this with your neighbors and your friends and your family are basically endless. Now, you don't have to be that person talking about it at cocktail parties, like I have found myself being accidentally 1,000 times, but look for opportunities, right? If someone asks where you were on the weekend, you're at a pro-life fundraising dinner, say that, right? Be willing to talk about it with people, even if it might not be popular. And when you get into those conversations, be armed with the best things to say, and really ask questions, like look to understand where the person's coming from if they disagree with you, and know how to respond to what they're saying, not just to kind of rehearse your favorite, most comfortable talking points.
Yeah, and I think it's super important to bear in mind that, if you're at a barbecue this weekend and somebody talks to you about abortion and disagrees with you, you're not going to change their mind over a hamburger. But if they see that you respect them and their view, and you're willing to listen, and you don't seem to hate people, that actually moves the ball forward a little bit. And it's going to take time, and be willing to let it take time. Ryan, one of the questions we have is Michigan hopeless? That's one of the places where we've lost in the last year. And it's close to my heart because I was just stranded there for a number of days. But anyhow.
So I need to, I would need to refresh my memory on what was the nature of the Michigan loss.
There was a ballot. There was a ballot.
This was a ballot initiative, right? And so, I mean, so I don't think it's hopeless. I mean, I think Michigan is as far as I can tell, a purple state, and it's going to kind of swing blue and red back and forth. And so that doesn't mean it's hopeless. I mean, I would say like something like Massachusetts or Illinois or California is truly hopeless. Like Michigan is not as far gone as those places. I think if I remember Michigan, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and Dan, feel free to jump in too. I mean, I did think that both Michigan and Kansas were kind of casualties of the sort of sudden, confusion and media craziness. And I wonder if it had happened now, if it would turn out differently, or a year from now.
Yeah, and if I'm remembering Michigan correctly, wasn't part of the fear here was that there wasn't a concrete, like, proposed, this would be the policy that would go into effect. And so the pro-choice side scaremongered off of that. And it might have even been like a constitutional amendment that has now protected abortion as a fundamental right. Which just means, look, I mean, you can amend the Constitution one way, you can also amend it the opposite way. So there's more work to be done at the state level there. But the other thing to say, and this is true for Michigan and the states that I mentioned that are much more hopeless, federal legislation would trump state constitutions, especially if it's based upon the 14th Amendment. And for that matter, a court ruling interpreting the 14th Amendment. And this is why if we were to have red states protect unborn babies, even with the best, conception laws or 6-week laws, we would still have the blue states, which are the most populated states. And many of which are advertising themselves as abortion sanctuaries, having abortion on demand. This is, to my mind, why a federal solution, a house divided can't stand. Lincoln was exactly correct about that in the slavery context. It's also going to be true as a long-term solution in the abortion context. And so a state constitutional amendment can't conflict with the actual U.S. Constitution. And I think properly understood, the word person in the 14th Amendment, where it says Congress shall make no law depriving any person. I just opened with the First Amendment text. So I'll fix that. No state shall deprive any person of equal protection of the law or due process of the law. And that doesn't matter whether it's a state constitutional amendment that's denying a person equal protection of the law or due process, or it's a run-of-the-mill state statute. You can't have state laws, any state, denying a person equal protection and due process. And that's what abortion on demand does. And that's what the abortion period does. So I think there's a huge opening here. We're nowhere close to getting it enacted, though. We don't have 5 votes in the Supreme Court for this. We certainly don't have 60 votes in the Senate. This is a long-term solution. But I do think we need to, and there was a very helpful statement that NR published just a week or two ago, that I signed, that Robbie George signed, that Jerry Bradley signed, that I think Lila Rose and Kristen Hawkins were kind of the two organizers of the statement, so Students for Life and Live Action. And it says, look, the North Star, the final goal here is to see that every human being has equal protection rights. And that's going to be a 50-state solution. But we're going to work incrementally, I think, first through the red states, then through the purple states, and then I think eventually at the federal level. So no one's, beyond hope, but it is going to take time.
We only have a few minutes left, but one of the things we haven't really talked about, Alexandra, is the majority of abortions in America happen by pill. And I don't even think people realize that. How does that change the whole conversation? And it hasn't changed the conversation yet. We've had, we have lawsuits and we have pharmacies, saying they'll dispense the pills, in some cases, irregardless of the law in the state. How does that change everything, and how should it have us thinking about this all differently?
Yeah, so I guess the quick version here is that chemical abortions, which happen usually in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. I think they're only authorized up through 10 weeks, but they're prescribed after that point. And they make up more than 50% of abortions now. And so you could kind of see in the couple of years leading up to Dobbs, abortion proponents really began to kind of move into this camp and really start to push chemical abortions, because for one reason, they happen earlier in pregnancy. And so if you have something like a 15-week pain capable law or even a 12-week law, you can still get chemical abortions for, the entire time that you would have chemical abortion. So that's part of it. And part of it was they began to push for chemical abortions, given to women via telemedicine. So you don't even have to go see a doctor in person to get one, and they want them dispersed by the mail. And so you can see kind of the situation they're setting up if Roe v. Wade were ever overturned, and if states were able to put pro-life laws in place, they could still try to get chemical abortion drugs out to women via the mail. Women take these in the privacy of their home all alone. It's obviously very hard to regulate about, although it's still possible. I mean, it is illegal to mail them, but they get away with it. So I think the long and short of it is this is a lot more complicated than just kind of shutting down as many abortion clinics as we can. And it goes back to kind of what Ryan was talking about, supply and demand, culture and law. If we don't have a pro-life culture, women who feel like they need to get an abortion are going to find ways to do it. And that's not a reason, as the other side would say, not to have pro-life laws. But we do have to realize we can't just focus on getting the policies we want, because unless we convince people that women really don't need abortion and that will support women and children and families, we have the kind of culture where that's possible. Things like chemical abortion are going to make it easy to keep getting abortions.
Well, I know it's not the only place, but Barnard College, the women's college in New York, has vending machines that dispense the abortion pills. In some of the poorest neighborhoods in New York, Eric Adams has them being dispensed for free. It does seem like the left prefers abortion, and I think we have to say that as often as possible, because as you said, Alexandra, earlier, they so often don't want to talk about what we're actually talking about, abortion and the cruel reality of a girl having to have an abortion by herself in her bathroom, in her dorm room, is just something that has to be talked about. We only have 3 minutes. Ryan, can you just a last word about where we are and where we need to be, and then Alexandra the same.
Last word, where we are and where we need to be. I mean, I guess it's similar
problems.
Yeah, I mean, bookend to where we started. We're in a better spot than where we were a year ago. Where we need to be, I think, would be a culture and a legal system that understands our embodiment as male and female, that understands the purpose of that as embodiment is for faithful union inside of marriage, that understands that children are gifts, and that understands that the entire society, both civil society and governmental policy, is meant to be at the service of these truths. That both law and culture are at the service of certain truths about human nature, human identity, and human flourishing. And that's where we need to go. Unfortunately, we have a very corrupt culture, a very corrupt legal system that denies fundamental truths about what it is to be human. And we have to recover that. And it just strikes me that this is going to be a generational battle. This is not going to be one at the next presidential election. It's not going to be one at the following midterms. This is something that I think my children, unfortunately, will still be working on. But I think we should be sober and realistic about, if it took 50 years, almost 50 years to overturn Roe, it may very well take another 50 years to fully respond to all of the carnage that came in the wake of Roe. And that means we got to put our hands to the plow. We got to, make the commitment now to seeing this through the long haul, even when there are momentary setbacks, even when there are circular firing squads, and we should avoid those as much as possible. But people are going to, ankle bite. They're going to be criticizing each other. Sometimes that can be for the good. Sometimes that's just detrimental. But we have to say we're not going to lose heart. We're not going to give up. We're not going to get discouraged. This is a long-term struggle, and it's a struggle for reform. It's a struggle to defend human dignity, human flourishing, and it's worth the fight.
And it does need to be said again that we didn't know, it wasn't a given that your children wouldn't be fighting Roe versus Wade. And so thanks be to God for that.
Yes.
They don't have that on their plate. Alexandra, your final thoughts?
Yeah, not a ton to add to that. I would just say, I think kind of like Ryan said, but to put it in a nutshell, that we have to remember as pro-lifers, not only are there plenty of, issues to focus on about the dignity of human life, in addition to abortion, I think we have to remember that the fight against abortion is happening in the context of a sexual revolution world. And if we don't remember that that's the fight we're having, ultimately, it's not a fight over convincing people that abortion is bad. It's a fight over the fact that we live in a culture where women feel like they need abortion. I think pro-lifers, the more we keep that in perspective, the more success we'll have in this kind of generational fight.
Well, again, the book that Ryan and Alexandra wrote is Tearing Us Apart, How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing. And there's a new edition out in paperback now with a new forward. And we also mentioned The Rights of Women, Reclaiming a Lost Vision by Erica Bacchiacchi, and Adam and Eve After the Pill Revisited by Mary Eberstadt. That gives you some summer beach reading. Really important stuff for us to really understand where we are and where we need to be going. So thank you. I'm Kathryn Lopez from the National Review Institute. Thank you, Ryan Anderson. Thank you, Alexandra DeSanctis from the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And thank you everyone for joining us. This will be on YouTube later today. Please share it because I think the more sober conversations we have about this, the better. And I just want to quickly mention too, someone from Michigan mentions that there will be a Michigan March for Life on November 8th, which is the date of the election last year. And so go check that out, especially if you're in Michigan. Thank you again. Please keep National Review Institute, National Review and Ethics and Public Policy, EPPC.org in mind. Thank you.